Lutheranism in the demographics of the United States looks a lot like a map of German immigration. Luther himself was a German, and in the early 1800s, even when non-Lutheran Germans emigrated to the USA, they would find that the place that seemed the most like home was the local German-speaking Lutheran Church. Lutheran preachers began to evangelize door to door, finding families that spoke German and roped them into the local Lutheran churches. In addition to the scattered immigration, several hundred Saxon Germans arrived on 3 ships and settled in Missouri. There was debate over whether they were still under the denominational hierarchy of the Lutheran Church in Germany, but ultimately it was decided that they would be self-governing. Along with churches started through missionary work, many Lutheran churches with a German background met in 1846, and in April of 1847 a new denomination was formed by them, the German Evangelical Lutheran Synod of Missouri, Ohio, and other states. The Synod was conservative. They required complete doctrinal agreement for participation in communion and enforced adherence to the Book of Concord. Throughout the 19th and 20th centuries, most other Lutheran bodies were merging into larger and larger groups. But with little exception, most churches in the German Evangelical Lutheran Synod stayed put. Even though the fire of the fundamentalist-modernist controversy mostly didn't touch Lutheran churches, the changes that the fundamentalists in Baptist, Methodist, and Presbyterian churches were noticing in their denominations were happening in the Lutheran bodies as well. If Lutheranism could be forced into one of those boxes, which it can't, the German Evangelical Lutheran Synod would come out looking much more in the fundamentalist box than many of the other Lutheran church bodies would. In 1947, they renamed to the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod, and from the 1950s through the 1960s, the LCMS began to dabble in ecumenism with other more liberal Lutheran bodies, while retaining their strict orthodoxy. Or at least, that's what they thought. And when J.A.O. Preuss II became the president of the Missouri Synod, he was determined to make sure the LCMS really was staying theologically true. LCMS laity had looked at the Concordia Seminary in St. Louis suspiciously. Reports from students told Preuss that professors at the Concordia Seminary in St. Louis had bought into the historical critical method of Bible interpretation. This method viewed the Bible as a book to be studied with the same critical eye as other ancient literature, where things mustn't always be presumed to be historically factual. Adam and Eve weren't necessarily literal people. Jonah wasn't necessarily swallowed by a giant fish, and so on. Preuss had every teacher at the university come before a group of examiners, and the conversations were tape-recorded and transcribed. A blue book with the findings was mailed to all LCMS congregations and pastors. Following the investigation, the president of the seminary, John Tietjen, was suspended. Because the liberalism of the seminary had been an open secret, most of the students were in alignment with Tietjen, and they immediately refused to attend classes. 45 of the 50 professors were on the side of Tietjen and the students. They likely realized that if they didn't join the students in protest, they would be removed one by one from the seminary as well. For over a month, these teachers did not teach, and they were threatened with termination if they did not fulfill their contracts. Ultimately, on February 19 of 1974, the professors were suspended, the majority of students held a walkout with the press invited, and a new seminary was formed, Concordia Seminary in Exile, or Seminex as it became informally known. And then, after the LCMS threatened legal action due to the name of Concordia being used, in 1977, they officially changed the name to Christ Seminary Seminex. The seminary borrowed facilities from Eden Seminary and St. Louis University until they were able to procure their own. The LCMS announced that no Seminex students would be ordained in the LCMS or receive placement. Seminex students traveled the nation, going to LCMS churches to promote their cause, and an organization called Evangelical Lutherans in Mission was formed from the more liberal congregations that supported them. Additionally, the students were able to get 8 of the 35 district presidents to begin to place Seminex graduates into churches. The LCMS in convention demanded that this stop, and while 4 district presidents complied, 4 disregarded the order and were summarily fired. Tietjen, who had been elected president of Seminex, expected that over 1,200 churches would leave the LCMS when a split inevitably took place. December of 1976 saw the LCMS split, and many reasons were given, but the Seminex situation had driven everything to a head. Churches leaving the LCMS formed a new church body, the Association of Evangelical Lutheran Churches, or AELC. Far fewer churches than Tietjen had expected left, only around 250, or 4% of the LCMS, and in 1987, after 13 years of exile from the LCMS, Seminex finally dissolved. The AELC, as soon as it split from the LCMS, was unsurprisingly much more liberal. They began to ordain women and enter into full communion agreements with other more liberal Lutheran denominations. So where is the Evangelical Lutheran Church in America in all of this? The ELCA, a theologically liberal mainline denomination, was formed in 1988, a merger of three denominations. One was the American Lutheran Church with 2.25 million members. The second was the Lutheran Church in America with 2.85 million members. And the third was the AELC with only a bit over 100,000 members, meaning that the split from the LCMS ended up wholesale as part of today's ELCA. So is there any chance of the LCMS and the ELCA, with those who left, ever joining together in one denomination? Lutherans in either denomination watching this video are probably laughing at the thought. Reality is, with the most liberal congregations leaving the LCMS in the split, the LCMS is further from the theologically liberal Lutheran majority in the USA than it ever has been. Certainly, the first step that would need to be taken by the LCMS for us to consider this even a remote possibility would be them joining the Lutheran World Federation, a community of Lutheran denominations which the ELCA is a part of, along with over 140 other denominations representing over 74 million people. The LCMS considers it important to only have communion with churches that they are in doctrinal agreement with, and the ELCA doesn't fit the bill. The 2001 LCMS National Convention declared that they didn't view the ELCA to be an Orthodox Lutheran Church body. There are several interesting videos and books on Seminex. One documentary that I watched in preparation for this video that I think you'll find interesting is Seminex: Memories of a Church Divided. You can find a link to it in the description of this video. If you like this video, check out the other videos in the Church Splits playlist. And for more, subscribe to the Ready to Harvest channel.